AITA for ruining my family's image after my dad was arrested for abandoning me in the cold? My name is Liam. Today I am 23 years old, but this happened when I was 16. I had no car, no job, and no real tools to defend myself. I lived in a house where my father, Richard, decided what was true and what was not. My mother, Susan, backed up every single one of his versions, and my younger sister, Chloe, understood very early on that siding with him kept her safe. I was not the typical problem kid people imagine. I did not skip class. I did not sneak out at night. I did not get into fights. But I asked questions, I observed, and I refused to accept being blamed for things that were not true. For Richard, that was enough. He labeled me as difficult before I even started middle school. From then on, nothing I did could change that narrative. If I spoke, it was because I was arguing. If I stayed quiet, it was because I was resentful. If I disagreed, it was disrespectful. He needed me to play that role. Susan was in charge of reinforcing the story. If he yelled, she would say, "You know how your father is." If he insulted me, she would claim, "He wants you to be stronger." If I talked back, then I was creating drama. Chloe watched all of that and learned quickly. In our house, there were two types of people, those Richard approved of and those he crushed. She knew perfectly well which group she wanted to belong to. A mocking smirk, a look of superiority, a venomous comment every now and then. That was her contribution. The only place that felt somewhat neutral was the home of my grandfather, David, my mother's father. He was not loud or confrontational, but he was constant, stable. The rest of the family, uncles, aunts, cousins, preferred to stay on the sidelines of the conflicts. They did not intervene, but they did not feed them either. That night, everyone was gathered for a family dinner. Uncle Mark and Aunt Jessica with their kids, Aunt Emily and Uncle Brian, and several cousins between the ages of 10 and 20. It should have been a warm atmosphere. It was not. We arrived late, and Richard blamed me before we even rang the doorbell. If someone did not take so long to get ready, we would be on time, he muttered. I was ready before everyone else. I replied quietly. Chloe blurted out, "Sure you were," as if it were a running joke. Richard cut in. "Do not start." David opened the door and let us in. The house smelled like roast beef and potatoes. The conversations died down slightly when we walked in. Aunt Emily greeted me. Aunt Jessica asked how school was going. Before I could answer, Richard intervened. He'd do better if he put in some effort. Uncle Mark raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. My cousins exchanged glances. It was not the first time they had witnessed something like this. We sat down. I ended up near the end of the table, next to the little ones. Richard and Susan positioned themselves near David, as always. Chloe sat with the older cousins in her untouchable role. For a few minutes, we ate in silence. Then Richard raised his voice enough for half the table to hear him. "So, Liam, are you still having problems at school?" I looked at him. "I do not have any problems." Aunt Emily asked, "What kind of problems?" Richard answered for me. "You know, calls from teachers about his attitude. The usual." "None of that happened," I said. Susan sighed exaggeratedly. "Liam, do not get defensive." Uncle Brian looked at me. "Did they really call?" "No," I repeated. Richard scoffed. "Here we go again." Chloe laughed under her breath. "He always does the same thing," Richard continued, listing supposed flaws as if reading a report, that I was lazy, that I did not help around the house, that I had no goals, that I was disrespectful. Some cousins looked uncomfortable, others avoided looking at me. Then he dropped the lie that crossed the line. "David, you're going to love this one. Liam got suspended last month for talking back to a teacher." I froze. So did several cousins. "I was never suspended," I said. The table fell completely silent. Uncle Mark asked, "Wait, never?" Richard glared at me as if he could not believe I had spoken. "Are you calling me a liar in front of everyone?" "I am saying it did not happen." Aunt Jessica set her glass down. The tension was obvious even to the kids. Susan chimed in. "Liam, you know what your father means." "No, I do not." Richard slammed his hand on the table. A few cousins jumped. "You do not correct me in my father-in-law's house." David spoke without raising his voice. "Richard, that is enough." But he had already stood up, pushing his chair back against the wall. "We're leaving." Susan grabbed her purse immediately. Chloe gave me a mocking smile. "Well done, Liam." No one dared to stop him. David watched us with an expression I will never forget. It was not surprise, it was concern. We walked out to the car in silence. The cold air hit hard. Richard started the engine and drove fast. I looked out the window. I knew that pattern. I knew how he gripped the steering wheel when he was planning something. I did not know what he was going to do, but I understood it would not just be yelling. The ride began with a heavy silence. Susan broke the stillness. You cannot let him talk to you like that in front of everyone. It was humiliating. Richard replied. He thinks he is an adult. Chloe added. He never takes responsibility for anything. I said nothing. Any word would be used against me. He wants to act like a man? Richard said. Fine, let's see. Susan agreed. He needs a lesson. We passed the turnoff to our house, then another. I checked the clock. Almost 10. The winter sky was pitch black. Where are we going? I asked. We're not going back yet, he finally said. First, you're going to learn something. The landscape changed. Fewer lights, fewer houses, open fields, empty highway. Finally, he pulled over on the shoulder of a narrow road. The headlights illuminated gravel and dry grass. Get out, he ordered. I thought I had misheard. What? He turned to me. Get out. Susan stared straight ahead, motionless. It is cold, I said. You should have thought about that before speaking up at dinner. You want to be an adult? Adults walk. Chloe let out a short laugh. So dramatic. Just get out. I opened the door. The chill pierced me instantly. My breath turned to vapor. You are going to walk home, Richard stated. It will give you time to think about your disrespect. Susan said nothing, not a single word to stop him. Get out and do not come back playing the victim, he added. You brought this on yourself. I closed the door carefully. Richard held my gaze for a second and drove off. The taillights grew small until they disappeared. The sound of the engine faded away, and I was left alone. I was 16 years old. Dead of night, empty road, no proper coat, no plan, with a massive walk ahead of me. The cold was not mild, it was biting. My hoodie was useless, the wind cut right through it. That stretch was not a regular route. It was a shortcut between fields and industrial zones. Hardly anyone drove through there, especially at night. Maybe a truck every half hour. Not the kind of driver who stops for a teenager. There were no patrol cars on those rural routes. There were no stores or parking lots or open buildings. Nothing. I started walking because staying still was worse. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes. I shoved my hands in my pockets, but they held no warmth. My fingers went numb, my feet felt like ice. Breathing hurt. I knew the direction, south and then east, to the industrial tract and from there toward the city. Almost an hour on foot, maybe more in that weather. I pulled out my phone. Black screen. Dead battery. No flashlight. No map. No way to make a call. Many people ask why I did not go straight to the police or the nearest house. There were no houses. And in my mind, calling the police was not a real option. I had been taught that Richard would always win. If I said he abandoned me, he would say I ran away. Susan would confirm his version. Chloe would reinforce the idea that I was exaggerating. Even if my phone had worked, I would not have felt safe calling. It would have been my word against theirs, and I had spent my whole life losing that battle. But in the ER, with David there and the nurses watching as my hands regained their color, it stopped being a private matter. Richard could try to manipulate the story. However, it was no longer just a family tale. It was an official record. I put the phone back in my pocket and kept moving forward. My fingers ached, as if the sensation was trying to return without fully succeeding. My feet were worse. My legs felt heavy, and every breath burned my throat. I focused on something basic, taking one step and then another. Fear had settled in my stomach, not as panic, but as a constant, steady presence. I stared down the road hoping to see at least one car. Just a single pair of headlights approaching. None appeared. Not a single beam in the distance. The walk became endless. After a while, I made out some streetlights in the distance, faint dots that barely broke the darkness. My neighborhood was still far away, but at least I had reached the outskirts of town. There were scattered houses here, all with their lights off. There was no movement, no cars driving by. When I turned onto the first residential street, the cold changed. It was no longer the wind, but the dampness of my own clothes. The sweat had cooled against my skin and was now soaking through me. My arms were shaking. My teeth would not stop chattering. I rubbed my hands together, but I could not feel my fingertips. The closer I got to my street, the more the fear transformed into something else. It was not relief. It was a feeling of heaviness, of unpleasant anticipation. I knew what arriving at that house would be like. Richard was not going to suddenly regret it. Susan was not going to apologize. Chloe was not going to pretend she cared. I turned onto my block. A few porch lights were on at neighboring houses. Cars rested in driveways, windows dark. Everything seemed normal, still. When I reached the walkway leading to my front door, the cold had already settled into my bones. The first thing I noticed was the porch light. It was off. Richard never turned it off when someone in the family was out at night, not even when he was upset. Seeing it dark made my stomach churn. I hurried up the steps, trying to force my legs to regain some heat. It was hard to grip the doorknob, but I managed to turn it. Locked. I tried again. Still locked. I knocked once, nothing. I knocked louder. Mom, it is me. Silence. I started banging with the side of my fist because my knuckles hurt too much to hit it straight on. Mom, open the door. For a second, the house remained mute. Then I heard something. A laugh. Not loud, but clear. I would recognize that tone anywhere. It was the laugh Chloe used when she felt she had won something. The sound pierced through the cold. I stepped away from the door and went to the nearest window. I cupped my hands around my face to block the glare from the street lamp. The hallway was lit, but nothing else. I moved to the second window, the living room one, which looked directly at the staircase. If the hallway light was on, you could see upstairs from there. The curtains were slightly cracked. I looked closely, no one downstairs. I glanced up the stairs. The hallway light spilled into one room. The upstairs one, mine. In the doorway, sitting comfortably on my bed, was Chloe. She had headphones on, her legs crossed, and was using my old laptop as if it were hers. My posters were gone. The shelves were empty. On the dresser were clothes that did not belong to me. The bedspread had been replaced by a brightly colored one, with glittery pillows. That hit me harder than the cold. They had not done that in the last hour. They had planned it before we even went out to dinner. I knocked on the glass. Chloe looked up, saw me, and smiled. Then she turned her head slightly and yelled something toward the hallway. I did not hear the words, but the tone was obvious. Mockery. Then she laughed again. I pressed my hand against the window. Opened the door. No reaction. She went back to what she was doing, cozy in the heat, while I was freezing outside. I went back to the front door and banged harder. Mom, Dad, I am freezing. Through the frosted glass, I saw movement. Susan appeared for a second. Her hand was on the lock. For a moment I thought she was going to open it, but she did not look directly at me. She did not seem surprised or confused. Not worried, either. She seemed annoyed, as if I had interrupted something. She shook her head, turned around, and walked toward the living room. My chest tightened. I banged again. Mom, seriously. I walked all the way here. I am freezing. I heard Richard's voice from inside, muffled by the door. His tone was clear. Let him learn. It was not a yell. It was dry, final. Then another laugh from upstairs. I stood staring at the door, trying to understand. They were not ignoring me by accident. They were locking me out on purpose. They had taken over my room before I even got back. They were not expecting my return. They had already decided what my new place would be. The cold was unbearable. I could barely move my fingers. My feet felt like blocks inside my shoes. I was breathing quickly and shallowly. Staying there any longer was dangerous. Still, I tried one more time. Please, just open up for a minute. I am freezing. Nothing. No footsteps. No answer. No sign that anyone cared. I took a step back. My mind was not racing. I was too cold for that. Everything felt mechanical, as if my body were acting without waiting for my thoughts to catch up. If I did not get inside somewhere soon, my body would start shutting down. I knew that much. The house next door belonged to Mrs. Peterson, a widow in her early 60s who baked excessively and gave away half of what she made. She was the only adult on the street who spoke to me without judgment. I did not know if she was awake. I did not know if she would answer, but it was my only option. Her son had installed a doorbell camera for her after someone tried to force her back door a few months prior. She did not like it at first. Then she loved being able to see who was outside without opening the door. I stepped away from my own door and trudged down the stairs. Every step was heavier than the last. I crossed the lawn, walked up her pathway, and raised my hand to knock. My fingers barely responded. I had to try twice for the knock to be heard. I knocked again, louder, and waited, shivering. The door opened. Mrs. Peterson was in a robe, her hair tied back. First she looked confused, then immediately concerned. Her eyes darted straight to my red, stiff hands, and then to my face. Liam, what on earth is going on? Come inside right now. I had no strength to argue or explain anything on the porch. I walked in, and the heat hit me with such intensity that I almost got dizzy. She shut the door quickly. My goodness, she murmured as she guided me into the living room. Your hands are freezing. She sat me on the couch, grabbed a knitted blanket from the armrest, and draped it over my shoulders without asking permission. Then she went to the kitchen and came back with a mug. It is not hot, it is lukewarm. Hold this. Do not touch anything too hot. You could damage your skin. I tried to wrap my fingers around the mug, but they barely moved. She took my hands and gently arranged them around the warmth. What happened? She asked quietly. I opened my mouth, but my jaw was trembling too much. She sat on the coffee table in front of me, leaning in a little, not pressuring me. Liam, I need you to tell me what happened. I took a deep breath. My dad. My throat closed up. He left me. She waited patiently. He left me on a road far from home. He told me to walk. Her eyes hardened. Why would he do that? I talked back to him at dinner. He said I embarrassed him. She stayed silent, truly looking at me. The shaking hands, the uneven breathing, the face mottled by the cold. And they did not let you in? She asked. I looked at the mug. They pretended not to hear me. Who locked the door? My mom looked right at me and walked away. Mrs. Peterson pressed her lips together. She did not look surprised. She looked angry, but in a controlled way. She stood up. You're going to call someone? No, not the police. Not yet. Someone's safe. She pointed to the phone on the side table. Take it. Call whoever will actually come for you. There was only one person. With difficulty, I dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. Hello, David answered. Grandpa, it is me, Liam. His voice changed immediately. What is wrong? Dad left me far from home. He told me to walk. There was a pause, not confused, but calculated. Where are you right now? At the neighbor's house. I walked to my house, and they would not let me in. Are you hurt? I am cold. Really cold. And they know you are outside. Yes. Another brief, heavy pause. I am coming right now. Stay there. Do not go back to that house. I swallowed hard. Okay. He did not hang up right away. Listen to me, Liam. You did nothing wrong tonight. Do you understand? I nodded, even though he could not see me. I will be there soon. When the call ended, I handed the phone back to Mrs. Peterson with stiff fingers. Is he coming? She asked. Yes. She nodded. Good. David is a solid man. She sat in the nearby armchair without crowding me, but close enough so I would not feel alone. She did not ask any more questions. She did not try to downplay what had happened. She did not give me the typical speech about parents being stressed. She just stayed with me, attentive, checking every few minutes to make sure my condition was not worsening. A while later, she stood up again, grabbed some thick socks from a basket by the stairs, and left them next to me. When you feel a little warmth in your feet, put these on slowly. No rush. I nodded. My teeth were still chattering, though no longer with the same violence. Time seemed to move slowly, but not in a distressing way. It was a firm, patient silence. The heat of the house slowly began to wrap around me. I still could not feel my toes, but the piercing burning in my hands was easing up. Then the glare of headlights swept across the front window. Mrs. Peterson stood up, walked to the door, and opened it before David could even knock. He walked in quickly, his coat still on. His eyes scanned me immediately. What did he do to you? He asked quietly. I could not answer. My body leaned forward. Not because I was collapsing, but because something heavy I had been carrying inside finally gave way. David stepped closer and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. It is okay. I am here now. We're leaving. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson, for taking him in. She nodded as we walked out. David wasted no time. Once he settled me into his truck, he did not demand details right away. He did not yell. He said nothing more than, buckle up, before backing out of the driveway. But the way he gripped the steering wheel said it all. His knuckles were white, tense, the skin stretched tight from how hard he was squeezing. I rubbed my hands together because they felt as stiff as rubber. The heater was blasted on high, but it did not seem like enough. David glanced at me out of the corner of his eye several times. How long were you out there? Long enough, I replied quietly. He left you on that rural road. His jaw set firmly. We will talk after you get checked out. He drove straight to the ER without hesitation. The lights at the hospital entrance were blinding after the darkness of the road. David walked fast, holding me by the arms when I stumbled. The triage nurse took one look at my hands and face and wasted no time on formalities. He needs a heated room. Possible frostbite on fingers and toes. Risk of hypothermia. They took me to a room with thermal blankets and a monitor. A nurse began examining my hands, gently pressing different areas. Do you feel this? More or less. That is not the answer we want, she muttered as she jotted it down. Another nurse took my temperature. He is cold, dangerously cold. David stood in a corner, arms crossed, watching everything with a contained fury I had never seen in him. A doctor walked in, reviewed the notes, and then looked at me. What happened? Did you get stranded somewhere? David answered before I could. His father abandoned him on a highway outside of town. The doctor raised his eyebrows. Is that true? I nodded. He told me to get out and walk home. The staff kept taking notes, gradually warming my hands and checking the circulation in my feet. Then another person came in, a woman with a badge clipped to her scrubs. I am the ER social worker. I need to ask you some questions. David stepped forward. I am staying. That is not a problem, she replied. She turned to me. Liam, I need you to tell me everything that happened tonight, from beginning to end. I did. No embellishments, no dramatization. The dinner, the car ride, being left on the side of the road, the walk, the locked door, the laughter from inside, seeing Chloe in my room, Susan ignoring me, Richard yelling at me from inside. The social worker kept a neutral face, but her pen moved rapidly. So, they knew you were outside in that cold. Yes, my mother looked right at me. My sister saw me and gave a mocking smile. And they would not let you in? No. She nodded and wrote something longer down. Her expression shifted. It was no longer just negligence. It was intentional harm. A nurse returned. Documentation complete. Photos of hands and face uploaded. Circulation is improving, but it remains concerning. The social worker looked at David. We are mandated reporters. This is no longer optional. We are notifying Child Protective Services and the police right now. David nodded. Good. I felt a different kind of internal tension. It was not exactly fear, but the realization that this had now breached the walls of our house. In less than 15 minutes, 2 police officers arrived. They spoke first with the social worker and then approached my bed. Liam, your grandfather says your father left you on County Route 7. Is that correct? Yes. And your mother and sister locked you out when you walked back? Yes. The officer received the printed documentation. Photos, temperature logs, notes on the loss of sensation, my statement about my room being taken over. The fact that they locked him out is significant, the social worker said. It indicates intent. The officer nodded. We will need statements from everyone, but this is enough to start the process. The other officer pulled David aside. We're heading to their house tonight. Good, David replied quietly. Do not give them a chance to manipulate anything. They left. The social worker stayed behind. Liam, with what we have documented, you will not be returning to them tonight. We will arrange an emergency placement with your grandfather, and there will be follow-up from Child Protective Services. I nodded slowly. Okay. David rested a hand on my shoulder. You are coming with me. You will never set foot in that house again. Before leaving, the social worker added, we will request an emergency no-contact order tonight. A judge will need to sign it, but you are not going back to them. A nurse checked my hands again. The feeling was partially coming back. Just as they finished wrapping my feet, an officer walked back in. Your father is in custody, he reported. With what we have so far, he was arrested tonight. He paused. Your mother is also under investigation. What she did or failed to do is relevant. We will document your sister's involvement as part of the case. The room fell silent. It was not tension, it was weight. David let out a long breath. You are safe now. For the first time that night, I believed him. Richard did not return home that night, nor the next day, nor the week after. For the first time in my life, the narrative was not under his control. He could not corner anyone in the kitchen. He could not raise his voice over mine. He could not twist the facts to look strong and make me look ungrateful. Now, people with badges and clipboards were writing the story. He spent the following nights in the county jail as the case moved forward. He was charged with abandonment and child endangerment, words I had never heard associated with him. Over the next few days, the prosecutor reviewed reports, medical notes, photographs, and statements. Then it was officially on the record. Two words that had never gone together, felony and father. At the initial hearing, his lawyer tried to frame it as a misunderstanding in a stressed household, but the medical documentation, my core temperature, the loss of circulation, and the pictures of my hands destroyed that version. The judge denied his release. Two actions that demonstrate a blatant disregard for a minor's safety. Clear risk of repeated harm. Richard did not look at anyone when he heard those words. He stared straight ahead, as if he could not accept that the system would not bow to him. Word spread fast in town. His job suspended him while HR evaluated the situation. It was not a conviction, but it was enough for people to stop looking at him the same way. His decades-old image shattered. Susan was not let off the hook either. Child Protective Services opened a full case against her for failure to protect. They had the footage from Mrs. Peterson's doorbell camera showing me shivering and begging for help. They had the medical notes indicating she saw me through the window and walked away. They had my statement and David's. Chloe had to undergo a psychological evaluation for her involvement. Her laughter was documented, along with the fact that she took over my room and treated the whole thing as entertainment. They described it as learned hostility, reinforced by the household dynamic. The extended family began to divide. A few aunts and uncles called David in horror. Some cousins texted me saying they had always suspected something was not right. Others insisted that Richard would never do such a thing, that I had exaggerated, or that I was letting strangers destroy the family. David shut down any attempt to blame me. A week after the arrest, the confrontation with Susan took place. David and I were in the living room when someone knocked on the door. Soft, irregular knocks, almost guilty, but David tensed up before opening it just a few inches. Susan stood there, bundled up in a coat. She looked exhausted, not from crying, but from not sleeping since the arrest. "Dad," she whispered, "I need to talk to him." "You should not be here," David said. "There is a no-contact order in place." "I am his mother," her voice cracked. "I have the right." "You lost that right when you left my grandson out in the cold." She flinched. "It was not like that." "Then explain it." Richard was furious. He lost control. "You know how he is." David did not look away. "You watched him through the window and walked away." I took a step forward. "You saw me shivering. You heard me banging on the door." Her eyes filled with tears. "I did not mean to hurt you. You just did not care if you did." She shook her head. "That is not fair." "He could have died," David stated with a harsh calmness. She looked between the two of us. "Do not say that like I am some monster." "You acted like one," David replied. "Not because of who you are, but because of who you let him turn you into." Her composure shattered. "I want my family back." David answered before I could. "You want the illusion of a family. That is over." She wiped her tears. "I do not know how to fix this. Start by accepting that Liam did not break anything." She took a deep breath and stepped back. "I hope someday you understand why I could not stand up to him. And I hope someday you understand why you had to." She left without another word. The soft sound of the door clicking shut carried more weight than any slammed door. David stood perfectly still for a moment. He was not angry. He was hurt. "Are you okay?" he asked me. I nodded, though the heavy feeling in my chest did not entirely fade. "You did not cause this." "They did." After that day, life settled into a strange but peaceful routine. Child Protective Services formalized my emergency placement with David. I had my own room, a bed, a door that locked from the inside. No yelling, no accusations, no waiting for the next explosion. Richard remained in jail awaiting trial. Susan continued under review and underwent supervised interviews. Chloe lived with another relative under supervision. The home I grew up in did not downsize, it disappeared. One night, sitting on the edge of my new bed, I realized something I had never allowed myself to think before. I was the mirror they did not want to look into. The night I challenged a lie did not destroy the family. It exposed what the family truly was. And for the first time, the consequences did not fall on me. Comment. After sharing this story, I have been reflecting on what it truly means to value yourself. Your personal truth is valid, even when others try to deny or rewrite it. Recognizing when a boundary has been crossed is a fundamental act of self-respect. You are never responsible for managing the reactions of those who benefit from your lack of boundaries. This story also shows the life-changing power of kindness from a single person who chooses to step in. It is a powerful reminder to be a safe harbor for others and to know who your safe people are. Remember that true healing can only begin once you are in an environment where you feel secure. Choosing to protect your own peace is not a sign of weakness. It is a profound act of strength. You absolutely deserve to be treated with dignity and to feel safe in your own life. I hope you always find the courage to build and protect that safety for yourself. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.